Picture a 5-year-old sitting in a foreign country. She arrived 3 months ago. She didn't speak a single word of the local language. Now she's laughing with the neighbor's kids, arguing over toys, and dreaming in 2 languages at once. You, sitting beside her, have been taking classes for the same 3 months. You can order coffee. Maybe. And the accent is still wrong. What is happening inside that child's brain that isn't happening inside yours? It isn't effort. You're working harder than she is. It isn't intelligence. It isn't motivation. The answer goes much deeper than any of that, and it reaches back further than you might expect, all the way to the first years of your own life, to a window in your brain that was open then and has been slowly closing ever since. Your brain was not designed to learn one language. It was designed to learn any language on Earth. At birth, a human infant can distinguish between every phonetic sound used in every language that has ever existed, all 7,000 of them. Researchers Patricia Cole, Andrew Meltzoff, and their colleagues at the University of Washington documented this in a landmark series of studies in the 1990s. They found that newborns are what Cole called citizens of the world, universal listeners with no phonetic preference. A baby born to English-speaking parents can hear the difference between sounds in Mandarin, Hindi, or Zulu just as clearly as a native speaker of those languages. By the time that same baby is 12 months old, that ability is nearly gone. Not because the brain was damaged. Not because anything went wrong. But because the brain did exactly what it was supposed to do. It listened to the sounds around it, decided which sounds mattered, and began quietly eliminating its sensitivity to everything else. The brain pruned itself. It became specialized. It stopped being a universal listener and became an expert in its own language. This is called the critical period. And understanding it changes everything you thought you knew about why language learning feels so brutally hard after childhood. The critical period is not a myth. It is not a convenient excuse. It is one of the most replicated findings in all of cognitive neuroscience, first formally proposed by neurologist Wilder Penfield in the 1950s and later expanded by linguist Eric Lenneberg in his 1967 book Biological Foundations of Language. Lenneberg argued that the brain has a biologically determined window, roughly from birth to puberty, during which language acquisition happens almost automatically, effortlessly, and with native-level results. After that window closes, something fundamental changes. But what exactly changes? The answer lives in the architecture of the developing brain. A child's brain is not a smaller version of an adult brain. It is a profoundly different kind of machine. In the first years of life, the brain produces synapses, connections between neurons, at a rate that will never happen again. By age 2, a child has roughly twice as many synaptic connections as an adult. The brain is overbuilt on purpose. It is preparing to absorb whatever environment it lands in. Language, music, social customs, motor patterns, all of it gets wired in during this explosive growth phase. Then, beginning around age 5 and continuing through adolescence, the brain begins a long process of pruning. Connections that are used frequently get strengthened. Connections that go unused get eliminated. The brain sculpts itself into an efficient, specialized tool. This process is called synaptic pruning, and it is the reason childhood learning feels so different from adult learning. When a 5-year-old hears a new word, her brain is flooded with plastic, uncommitted neural tissue that can reshape itself around that word, that sound, that grammatical structure. When you hear the same word as an adult, your brain is already densely wired. New information has to fight for space. It has to slot itself into existing structures rather than building new ones. The scaffolding is already up. The concrete is already dry. This is why children don't just learn faster. They learn differently. Watch a child acquire language and you will notice something that should seem strange but doesn't. She never studies grammar. She is never taught that in English, adjectives come before nouns, not after. She is never drilled on verb conjugation tables. She simply listens, speaks, gets corrected by the world around her, and adjusts. Within months, she is producing grammatically correct sentences she has never heard before, original constructions assembled from rules she has never consciously encountered. Linguists call this implicit learning. The rules go in below the level of conscious awareness. Adults almost never do this. When you learn a second language as an adult, you learn it explicitly, you memorize rules, you apply them consciously, you translate in your head before you speak. You are using a completely different cognitive system. The explicit learning system is powerful. It is the system that lets you understand calculus, read a contract, and learn to play chess. But it is slow. It is effortful. And for language, it is the wrong tool. The child has access to the right tool. You do not. At least not in the same way. There is a second reason children outlearn adults that has nothing to do with brain architecture. It has to do with fear. A 5-year-old who says the wrong word in the playground gets laughed at for 3 seconds and then keeps playing. She does not lie awake at night replaying the interaction. She does not decide that language learning is not for her. She does not begin calculating the social cost of every future mistake before she opens her mouth. You do all of those things. Research on second language acquisition consistently shows that anxiety is one of the most powerful predictors of failure in adult language learners. Stephen Krashen, the linguist who developed what is known as the input hypothesis, argued that adults have a psychological filter that children lack, what he called the affective filter. When anxiety is high, the filter closes. New language input bounces off the surface and never gets absorbed. You can sit in a language class for an hour, concentrate intensely, and come away having retained almost nothing, because your stress response was silently blocking the door. A child's affective filter is essentially non-existent. She absorbs language the way she absorbs everything, with curiosity, with zero self-consciousness, and with the unshakable confidence that the world will keep making sense even when she says something wrong. You lost that confidence somewhere. Most adults did. It is one of the quieter tragedies of growing up. Now here is the part that surprises most people. The critical period is not fully closed. It is not a door that slams shut at puberty and locks forever. It is more like a window that gradually slides lower and lower until, eventually, passing something large through it becomes very difficult, but not impossible. Researchers have found that certain aspects of language remain more plastic than others well into adulthood. Vocabulary, for instance, has no real ceiling. Adult brains are perfectly capable of acquiring new words throughout life. Reading comprehension, idiom recognition, and cultural fluency all remain learnable at any age. What becomes genuinely difficult after puberty is phonology, the ability to hear and produce sounds that don't exist in your native language, and implicit grammatical intuition, that deep, wordless sense of when a sentence sounds right. These are the things that give adult language learners their accents. These are the things that make grammar feel like a puzzle you're always solving rather than an instinct you simply have. But even here, researchers like Michael Long at the University of Maryland have found that highly motivated adults, placed in full immersion environments, can achieve levels of proficiency far beyond what most traditional language classes ever produce. The brain's plasticity never disappears entirely. It just requires more. More input. More repetition. More time inside the language and less time thinking about the language from the outside. Which brings you back to that 5-year-old in the playground. She is not sitting down with flashcards. She is not drilling verb conjugations before dinner. She is inside the language for 8 hours a day, surrounded by people who need her to communicate, in situations where communication actually matters. She is making mistakes in real time, getting corrected in real time, and using the language again in real time. The feedback loop is immediate and total. That is the environment her brain was built for. And it is the environment that adult brains, despite everything they have lost, still respond to more powerfully than any classroom can replicate. The lesson here is not that you cannot learn a language. The lesson is that your brain is operating under a different set of rules than it was when you were 5, and most of the methods used to teach adults languages were not designed with those rules in mind. When your child sits down beside you and begins speaking a foreign language with an accent indistinguishable from a native speaker, she is not smarter than you. She is not luckier than you. She is earlier than you. She arrived in the world with a brain designed to do exactly this, and she arrived before that brain had any reason to stop. You arrived with a brain that has done something extraordinary. It has already learned one language so completely, so deeply, so automatically, that you have forgotten you ever learned it at all. That is not a failure. That is the most successful thing your brain has ever done. And the child who seems to embarrass you with how quickly she learns? She is doing the exact same thing you did, 30 years ago, in the same playground, with the same fearlessness, in the language you now speak without thinking.